Imagine you're going through your morning routine, shower, get dressed, brush your teeth, and head to the kitchen for breakfast. You pop open an orange juice from the fridge and toss a big gulp back. Yikes! Bitter bombs start exploding in your mouth, and it's the worst taste ever. So what the heck does this have to do with wine? I know that's what you're thinking. It has everything to do with wine. That nuclear reaction that's happening in your mouth is a result of the high acidity in the orange juice clashing big and bad with the minty freshness of your toothpaste. So too can a high acidity wine after brushing your teeth, after eating certain foods, or simply not having your palate ready to be shocked awake by fresh, crisp, acidic wines. Sound like a reason to just avoid high acid wines? It's just the opposite. You simply need to know how to pair them with the perfect food. And in this episode, my friend and fellow somm, Richard King, is going to give you everything you need to know to make acidic wines and food sing. Welcome to Everyday Sommelier, where we make learning about wine approachable, fun, and something you can actually enjoy. I'm your host, Kristi Mayfield. Think of me as your sommelier next door, here to help you cut through the complexity so you can enjoy every glass with confidence and learn wine your way. In nearly every class or wine tasting I lead, the first thing we try is a fresh, crisp white or a sparkling wine. And inevitably at that first sip, that first taste brings about puckered lips, sour faces, and a whole lot of, wow, I wasn't expecting that, or this is way too tart for my palate. And I used to feel horrible, like I'd picked a terrible wine that no one but me liked. But then I realized it really wasn't the wine. It was just that I hadn't prepared the attendees for the wines appropriately. And if this has ever happened to you, you're in luck today. Not only will you learn why this is happening, but you'll learn how to turn those super high acidity wines into your food's best friend. I am super excited for today's topic, acidity and wine. It is one of the things that I find trips people up the most, can cause so many frustrations for them, especially if you're not expecting a high acidity wine and pop it in your mouth and it can be like a nuclear reaction in there. So today I have a special guest, Richard King. He's the co-owner of Ellerby Fine Foods here in Fort Worth, Texas. But most importantly, he has about 30 years of being a sommelier under his belts. So if anybody understands the impact and the influence of acidity, whether that's acidity in wine or acidity in foods, and how those two things can either be magical or, as I said, nuclear, it's Richard. So thank you so much for being a guest on today's episode. I'm really, really excited to have you here. So let's start off with just talking about challenges that acidity brings when you're talking about food and wine pairings for an individual. So for our listeners here, I mean, what do they face? Let's talk about on high acidity wines. If you're not expecting it, what can happen in that scenario, especially when you have the wrong wine with the wrong food?
Sure. So first, I think it's important to identify what a high acidic wine is and what acid really means. Because when I'm talking to either my staff or to a guest about acid, they don't quite understand what acidity, what it is. We have a perceived idea what it is, but what is it doing with the wine? And how do I know if a wine is highly acidic? So very simple test I usually do with people is I just, taste a wine and a white wine. At first, white wine's a little bit easier to figure out higher acidic than reds. And so just take a white wine, put it in your mouth, push it around, swish it around, almost a little bit like mouthwash, then swallow it, and then let's kind of sit and think about 3 to about 7 seconds. And if your mouth is just really salivating, like you squeeze a lemon in there, that means it's high acid, right? And then wines that don't do it as long, lower acid, and the wines that hardly do it at all, it's going to be, either have more sweetness to it or very low acid wines.
I completely agree with you. In fact, I'll take it one step further. And for me personally, I will bend my head over after taking a sip of wine, open my mouth. And if I start to feel like I'm going to be dripping drool on my lip within a few seconds, I know it's a high acidity wine.
And so traditionally, I guess an extreme example of high acidic wine would be like a Sauvignon Blanc, right? Yeah. And then you kind of work your way backwards. Like Riesling will be a little bit less, and then Albarino, and then Chardonnay. We get all the way down to our Vignes that are kind of low acids. And so when you just kind of think about that, you kind of think of how acidic is our dishes as well, from that same kind of profile.
So leveraging that exact point, let's say you are serving this beautiful, fresh farm-to-table salad with a lemon vinaigrette, and they order that Viognier that we know is low acid. Might that experience feel like to them?
Not good. Yeah, not good. So here's why. When you're trying to pair wines with dishes, especially acidic wines with acidic dishes, you need them to somewhat match. And so that if you have a lemon vinaigrette going with a Viognier, you have two opposite styles profiles. So you have a highly acidic component, which is in your food, and on this example, in your food, and you have a very low acidic component, which is in your wine. So what happens is it's going to make that wine very flat and really lose all its nuances, and it's going to make that other dish, the food dish, really flabby. And so you miss the mark. I think people, well, I love Viognier and I really want this salad. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine. That's great. You own that. You made a decision. But if you want the dish to taste better, you want the wine to taste better, listen to this podcast and listen to it 10 times, or go back, and go to your retail shop or go to your som and say, hey, I want to have this dish. Give me a good wine to compare with this dish.
Exactly. So in that vein, let's just say before you even get that dish in front of you, yep, and you're trying, maybe you do pick a highly acidic mm-hmm. wine. What are some things when you first, as a wine consumer, a wine enthusiast, when you first taste that first sip of that high acidity wine and you haven't done anything to what we call open your palate? So yep, basically, or maybe you even brushed your teeth just before dinner, even worse. I mean, what are some pain points that can create for you? Because I have a lot of people at tastings who do just that. Sip a highly acidic wine, they're not prepared for it, or they've just brushed their teeth, yep, they've had some food that's going to clash with it. And I mean, it is like a bitter bomb. And all of a sudden they say, I don't like this wine.
Well, and so I call that resetting your palate. There's no better wine ever in the world to start off with than sparkling or champagne, which can be, if you can pick a very, low dosage wine, high acid wine, sparkling wine is a way to go on that side. Mm-hmm. One, I like the acid, what it does to it. So you had a cup of coffee, you brush your teeth, you had a bite of something before, where maybe that high acid wine with also the bubbles coming into play kind of cleanses your palate, and it kind of pushes everything back, and it awakens all your senses, not only your palate, but awakens all the other senses. It awakens your nose, and you start to see it, and then in your brain you're okay, we got something going on, and the next sip or next bite, I'm ready now. And so I like starting with acidic wines. It just kind of just flushes everything out.
And I love the sparkling wine. I mean, it's like a palate cleanser, mm-hmm, and on top of being absolutely mm-hmm. amazing and delicious.
Yeah, and the combination helps out a little bit. All little pops in your mouth, help kind of, push everything around.
If you were to give a few examples of, we talked about the salad dressing and the Viognier. I mean, mm-hmm. what are some classic, I'll call them terrible pairing choices that someone as a wine enthusiast could make that are going to potentially cause these really unbalanced experiences between the food and the wine? I mean, what are some things you've seen in your... Let's pause for a quick break. We'll be right back. Imagine you have a reservation tonight at the hot new local restaurant. You get there, you're meeting your friends, you sit down, the menu looks amazing. You know exactly what you're ordering to eat. However, you flip the menu over and start looking at the wine list. You don't recognize a single wine, and you have no idea what to order. If this sounds like an experience that you frequently have, you are in luck. Menu Match by WineWise was created exactly for wine lovers like you, because the number one question I get as a wine educator is not, what are the nuances of malolactic fermentation? Or how do you understand the difference between American oak and French oak? It's, how do I know what wine is going to pair with my meal tonight? I would love for you to be part of the beta test to provide real feedback so I can help you make Menu Match the perfect AI sommelier tool to take with you to dinner at any restaurant, anytime, to help you pick the perfect wine. Let WineWise transform your wine journey.
Well, you brought up a good example that somebody wants let's say a Chardonnay. That's a very common varietal that we drink a lot of. And so someone gets a Chardonnay, and let's say a Russian River Chardonnay, which I have an example of us in front of here is Russian River Chardonnay. So lots of grapefruit, goes through malolactic fermentation, so it has some weight to it, but the acid has calmed down because of malolactic fermentation that it went through. So we do that with a vinaigrette, any vinaigrette. It's really not going to work well with this wine. But this wine does have acid to it, and it has some weight to it as well, our volume. And so I would want to put that with more of a weightier dish that has lower acid. So let's call it a roasted chicken, of some sort. And you can do a sauce with that too. It could be a cream sauce, I wouldn't necessarily a heavy cream sauce, but maybe a lemon cream sauce, or a piccata, things like that, that still has some pop to it and some brightness to it. But your wine needs to match that. And so, I kind of tell people, when chefs are creating dishes, right, they're not just poaching a chicken or grilling a chicken. They're adding, 4 to 10 different spices and or techniques on how to cook that dish, right? And so wine, we think, Chardonnay, it's just one flavor. Well, that's completely the opposite. So, Chardonnay is another way. It is a kitchen pantry of wine, of flavors in here. You just got to figure out what that kitchen pantry of flavors in there is. Are we getting, what kind of fruits are we getting? What kind of non-fruits are we getting, fruits? Are we getting like the brighter style, like the lemon and the lime or grapefruit we get out of, a lot out of Sauv Blancs? Are we getting more of the melon and the stone fruits? So are we getting peaches or, honeydew? Well, there's 2 different kind of fruits in there. They could give 2 different profiles in that wine. Now, there's no honeydew in this wine, right? But wine Chardonnay can throw off sometimes a lot of honeydew, depending on where it's made and who made it, things like that. So, and so wine gets its spices from Mother Nature, from the ground. Also gets from the techniques of the winemaker. How much water it got that year, how was the wind and sun like, things like that, right? We can get real dorky on terroir, but anyways, with that being said, is that there you can break down a wine just like you can break down a dish. So, what are the major components in that dish profile? So, if you have chicken, okay, that's our protein. But chicken can go with red or white. So then what are we going for? So you're saying let's with whites. Okay, so let's say the chicken is a rotisserie chicken or poached chicken. So it's a very light style with a piccata sauce or a lemon beurre blanc sauce. All right, so now you got a couple components in there, and then is it just dish hot or cold? And so now we're breaking down this dish. So we have several components in this dish. We do the same thing in the wine. So I just can't say I want to go there. Hey, I'm cooking chicken, so I want Chardonnay. No, what kind of Chardonnay do I want? Or do I have any other kind of varietals that work outside the box of Chardonnay? But so I like to break down what other flavors are getting out of that particular wine that's in front of me, because there's hundreds of different styles of Chardonnay. Just like there's 100 different styles of grilling chicken.
Exactly. And I always talk about Chardonnay as being the chameleon in the wine world, because it can be that high acid lemon lime Chablis, or it can be a rich, buttery, creamy Napa Valley, highly oaked, malolactic fermentation ridden butter bomb. So you can go from fresh and crisp all the way to red, rich and creamy with one varietal. So it's so important not only to know the varietal, but all of those other nuances that you talked about. So there's a lot of cues and tricks, because that same Chardonnay on the rich and creamy style with that vinaigrette or that bright, sauce on your protein is not going to work, where the Chablis may be the perfect pairing. Same varietal. Great. So we've talked a lot now about the negatives, the what can go wrong. But I want to flip the gears for our listener on, what can go right? How do you appropriately leverage the flavor nuances, the mouthfeel nuances, the component nuances of food and wines to get something really amazing for like that perfect pairing? And what are some of your guidelines when you're making a recommendation to be able to have that perfect balance? What are you looking for?
Yeah, and so I think that's probably one of the questions any somms probably get the most in her career is, what do I pair with this, vice versa? What wine do I pair with this dish, or this dish I'm ordering, what wine do I have? So it's, because some people are like, hey, I have that. We got this wine from our wedding. We want to have a really good dinner, and I want to cook dinner for my wife. I'm like, okay, well then what wine is it? It's this. Okay, then let's work backwards. And sometimes people do it the other way around, right?
Correct.
So number one thing is super easy for everybody to remember. If it grows together, it goes together. Yes. So that's a very classic pairing 101s. Chiantis go with red sauces. And there's a reason why the French and Italians are so great at pairing wine and food together and food and wine together, is I'm not sure which came first. I don't know if the wine came first or the food came first in our countries, but we've been doing wine for over about 2,000 years. So,
Right.
So they grew grapes that grew well in their region, but they also grew crop and animals raised animals that also went well in the region as well. So those two, they're naturally going to go together, So back to, let's stick with old world. So, France and Italy and Germany, things like that. So in Italy, if you're going to go more of that, Southern Italy style and Sicilian, then go with Sicilian Mediterranean more style of food, right? Then you go in the Tuscan wine. Well, you're going to go with Tuscan foods, and we're going white and reds on both these styles, right? And then you work your way up. So then we got Piedmont. So I love squab, wild game with our Barbera, right? Our Barbaresco, because, that's what they raise a lot of squab there, and they grow some of the best Barbaresco period in the world. So I love it there, right? Then you move your way to France, and, you see this cuisine changes from, south to north, and then same thing from France, all over is, when you're in Champagne, they don't eat and drink the same thing they're eating in Bordeaux and drinking the same thing in Bordeaux. So that's why I do the same thing. It's like, if you have a Bordeaux wine. Now, Bordeaux wines are a little bit more forgiving, I think, than some other wines out of France, but have a Bordelais style dish that's going to be savory and not super sweet, and it may not have as much fat in it as some other area, like in Texas. We do a lot of good brisket, right? It's a holy grail. And so from my example is, you don't see brisket necessarily a whole lot in France, right? But you see brisket in Texas. So, what do you have in brisket? You have umami, you have smoke, you have meaty, you have just really tender and salt, things like that. Mm-hmm. So people say, well, I want cab. Well, actually, you know what? Like Syrah goes really great with that. And the reason why Syrah or Grenache is because it already throws off that smokiness, already throws off that meatiness. Mm-hmm. It has some good tannins to break down that fat in that brisket. So, or Tempranillo, and so, and so let's stick with that. Grows together. So as Texas, what we do well here, beef, right? Another varietal we do well here in Texas is Tempranillo. Mm-hmm. And so, William Chris or Law, things like that. Go buy some great Texas Tempranillos, and goes great with our brisket we do here.
I love that you're bringing not only Texas wines into it, but I love the fact that we are covering not just white wines, but red wines, because I think one mistake that's very common is thinking that only white wines are acidic. Red wines can be equally acidic. And I think that's one of the key elements you have to take into consideration in these pairings. We talked about classic pairings. There's the steak and cab. We've talked about a lot of regional, that what grows together goes together. And then there's obviously going to be some really creative and unusual pairings that Assam could make as a recommendation for someone at a restaurant or to pair with that wine you have at home. So if you could kind of keep things narrow, we've talked about the elements behind it, the principles behind it, but if you want to keep it simple, what are a few very safe food and wine pairings where a high acidity wine is going to work well every single time? And in particular, what are some of your favorites, and kind of what successes have you had, whether that's your own dishes at home or here at LRB or in your career? One, I'd love that. Let's cover traditional, let's cover regional, but then I'd also love to get into any surprise high acid wine and food pairings that surprised you even.
Yeah. So traditionally, let's stick with Texas here. I grew up hunting and fishing, and so I'm a bird hunter mainly. And so, shooting a lot of quail, and quail can really do well with Pinot Noir, a high acid red, and then I'll grow up duck hunting as well. So you have two types of birds, right? You have one is a white game meat and one is a red game meat. One is a little bit more gamier than the other, but Pinot works well with wild game. I think because of that tanginess and all of that bitterness and that wild game can put off here in Texas. I think Pinot Noir does the same thing. It can be tangy. It can be a little bit bitter. And bitter's a good thing. Like coffee is very bitter, right? But we drink a lot of coffee. Okay, so let's make sure bitter is a good word here. And so now, what am I going to do with that quail or that duck, right? So am I going traditional French style and, going duck confit? Right. So I would have to have a totally different kind of Pinot Noir because I'm adding a lot more fat, right? I'm rendering the duck down in its own fat. So it's going to be a heavier dish, and then let's say I'm doing just a red demi glaze sauce with that, right? So I want to do a demi glaze sauce, red demi glaze sauce that's going to pair well with that Pinot. So I might even use a Pinot Noir or Burgundy in demi glaze, right? So now people say, do you use expensive wine when you cook? That's up to you. The answer is don't use super cheap wine also. tell people, like, when they use wine in cooking, just go do average run. We don't need to put Lafite in there, but we don't need to put, a $5 bottle of red in there as well. Your sauce will taste like a $5 bottle of red. So I like that traditional style so that's a red example. On the white example, here at Ellerby, we get a lot of fresh just vegetables. We're a seasonal restaurant. So Molly, my business partner, chef, she is constantly doing everything with vegetables as much as she can. And Molly loves vinaigrettes because it really just pops those veggies out, right? So, but when Molly does that, let's say we're having sometimes vegetables vinaigrettes, like right now in the summer and spring, I can't use the same wines I'm going to have here at Ellerby in the winter, because we're going to have different kind of vinaigrettes and different kind of vegetables in the wintertime. So let's talk about right now. So we're getting a lot of really great tomatoes. We're getting great peaches and strawberries and things like that. So tomatoes, vinaigrette, it goes all kinds of vinaigrettes, right? And so I would want to use a wine that, I love sparkling. I talked about at the beginning. I think sparkling wines go great with salads. And then I also like, just like you mentioned, like Chablis would go great with, or a Sancerre or a Sauvignon Blanc go great with kind of really fresh, because you're thinking fresh wines, fresh produce, fresh vinaigrettes. Then, let's say we go more to a risotto style. So we're doing risotto with, or just a plain risotto. We don't have to add a protein. But what's in a risotto? Is it a white risotto? It's made with saffron. Well, then, your dish started going a little bit more weightier, a little bit. It's still a quiet dish, but we can go to a weightier wine and more of a quiet wine. So I call, like, an Albarino is a weightier wine, but not as loud, not as acidic, on that side going with that dish. So things like that.
I love that. Yeah. Last night I did a lemon shrimp risotto, and I had a Turon, and it went really.
Wow. So you did a good example. So you not only did you pair, you did compare. That's what I call compare. And you also did Turon.
Yeah, no, I did that because I did multicolored carrots. I had the mirepoix in there, pretty heavy, but then I marinated my shrimp and lemon zest, lemon juice, olive oil, a little bit of seasoning, and then topped it with some fresh basil from the garden.
And when you do that home chefing like that, and pulling a wine out of your out of your retail store, out of your cellar, take note. We always take notes when we make a dish right at home, like, oh gosh, I did this, or I cooked it too long, or too much salt. Well, take note when you do the wine pairing. Oh, this was great. Or you know what, it made the dish too acidic, or we missed it, or made the wine flabby, or is perfect. So I take notes on both sides. We forget about the beverage is the other half of the experience, and people put all the weight and experience on the dish itself versus I'm the other way around, but I'm unique, I know. So, but yeah, take notes on that.
That's such a great tip, because I always encourage our listener to take notes, whether, just snapping a picture and using their notes in their mobile device, or just in the image itself, putting some notes. So I love that tip, and do it at home too. Don't just do it when you're out and about at restaurants. So first of all, we've got pay attention to, as far as wrapping up the tips, pay attention, the acid levels, both in your dish and in your wine. To make sure you take notes and remember, figure out a way to remember what worked well, what you liked, what didn't work well. So what would be your final tip to kind of wrap up the acidity in wine and food pairings?
Two more things for me is one, and another basic one. It's just look at your components of that dish. So we just can't say just the white wine with seafood, red wine with meat. That nomenclature, that's gone. So we have to get rid of that. So yeah, no kidding. What would be, and that's my second point. It's a good segue, but where is this dish? How are you cooking this dish? What's going in this dish? And then work either through your knowledge of that wine varietal, where it's grown and things like that, or talk to your retail person like, hey, I need this kind of profile of a Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc because I'm having this dish. Right. So work with your somm or your server or your retail person to work with you backwards on that. But also the yay is that, get outside your box too. Right. And so, like we eat just a lot of Asian food in my house. Right. Same. Asian food goes with a ton of just beverages in general. Right. Because we have the fried portion, we have the saute portion, we have the stir fry, we have the sweet, we have the salty, we have the spicy. We have all kinds of components going on in just a region of food. Right. Well, in the Asian market, we don't see a whole lot of wines coming out of there. We are seeing a little bit more now. But I mean, like obviously sake is, it's going to go great.
Sake and beer.
Sake and beer is going to go great. It's going to go great. So if you want to stick with easy and go out, and maybe you have never tried sakes, they're great to try on purpose with these kind of foods. So do it. That's get out of your box a little bit. But also another reverse side is like have a dry Riesling that is going to have really a lot of high acid. It's going to break down all of that spice. Spice likes acid, and spice also prefers a little bit of sweetness. Exactly. So if you can have, a little bit of sweetness sometimes on that wine, and I'm not talking about sugar sweet, I'm talking about fruit sweet on that wine, that really kind of tame that acid down a little bit. I'm sorry, the spice down on it, and really make that wine come out better, and makes also the food even taste better.
I could not agree more. Well, I love all of these tips. And your last note kind of gave us a segue, Richard, into next week's episode, where you're also going to be my guest, where we're going to be tackling the beast of sugar, not just sugar in foods, but sugar in wines, and really helping you, our listener, understand that sweet wines aren't necessarily a bad thing, but also pairing sweet wines with food is an art and a skill, but it's not as complicated as we make it sometimes.
That's right.
Awesome. What a fun episode. I know you have enjoyed taking a completely new look at high acidity wines, just as I have. So if you loved this episode, please scroll down in your Apple Podcast app and give us a 5-star rating and a review. Better yet, take the time, instead of a review, tell me what you want us to cover on an upcoming episode. Go to www.wine-wise.com and be on our insider list so you can find out all the great things that are happening to transform your wine journey. And in next week's episode, we're taking the opposite twist on food and wine pairings and heading over to the sweet side. Richard will be joining me again, and I know you're going to want to take a walk with us on the dessert side of life. So until then, pop the cork and learn wine your way.